Welcome, everyone. I will give it another minute or two for more guests to join. All right, I think we can get started. So, hello and welcome to another edition of our Drinking Water Wise webinar series. Today's topic is the history of source water protection. I'm your host, Trent Boss from Lower Trent Conservation and the Trent Conservation Coalition. I also have with me today Natasha, Jason, Haven, Marika, and Tom from Quinte, Cataraqui, Rideau Valley, and Niagara Peninsula Conservation, respectively. They will be here helping to moderate the chat, answer any questions you might have, and provide technical support if needed. So before we start, I'll just mention a few housekeeping items. This webinar, like most of our webinars, will be recorded and available on YouTube following the webinar. Just give it perhaps tomorrow, it should be up. All participants are muted and your cameras should be turned off. If you wish to participate, please use our chat or Q&A functions built into Zoom. One of our panelists will hopefully be able to address your questions. So they will either address them directly through the chat or they will be saved for our presenters to answer towards the end. If you are experiencing any technical issues, please contact Marika Livingston at marika.livingston@mrsourcewater.ca. So to go over our agenda for today, first I will do a brief presentation, mostly on the best practices for source water protection, for non-municipal source water protection, that is. Then we'll welcome our special guest, Venkat Ramani, to talk about the history of source water protection. And then finish it off with a few questions, both those that were pre-submitted, so thank you to anyone who did that, as well as any new questions from the chat. So at this point in our presentation, we typically give a little overview of source water protection. However, given today's topic, I think there'll be a bit of duplication there. So I'll leave that for him and move instead into number 2 here, the protection for private systems. So there are there are new resources developed for those not on municipal drinking water systems that we refer to as the best practices for source water protection. So not all of our drinking water sources are protected by a multi-barrier approach as the Clean Water Act's municipal system sets out. Some of our residents have to rely on protecting their own sources. So the best practices are a voluntary guidance document developed by the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks with a goal to aid in protecting drinking water sources that, again, are not protected by the Clean Water Act or a source protection plan. This document walks the reader through how to identify vulnerability of their drinking water system, how to assess their local setting, identifying potential risks, and how to manage those risks to better protect your drinking water source. It includes useful information for private residences, but also those in especially smaller municipalities and other agencies and associations. So at this time, one of my colleagues, if they haven't already, will put a link to this document in the chat. So why are the best practices important? Essentially, they were created to fill this gap in the drinking water protection between people who receive municipal source water and those who rely on private drinking water sources. So as you can see in this diagram, private system owners have the responsibility to ensure that their drinking water is safe by doing their own treatment and testing without being a trained professional. On the other hand, municipally treated water has these trained professionals along each step that test and treat your water to ensure it's safely distributed to your home. So you have to basically be your own drinking water expert and make sure you're filling in those gaps. I guess the biggest reason why we're all doing engaged in source water protection is to aid in protecting human health, but it also protects the environment. Best practices can also help extend your drinking water system life and avoid some high costs, including cleaning up potential contaminated sources. Having to seek a new source, such as having to drill a new well, can be very costly, and potential increasing treatment needs. It can also aid in some land use planning decisions. So that can include doing any building additions or especially installation of a septic tank and where you might be placing that. It can also increase public awareness and accountability of drinking water stewardship, since rural landowners often share the same source of drinking water. Over the next two slides, we've highlighted a few other measures that systems owners can undertake to better protect their drinking water system and supply, especially when on private water. Biggest thing really is just to test your drinking water regularly. Drinking water test kits are available for free at all Public Health Ontario locations, and they test for the two biggest contaminants of concern being E. coli and total coliforms. If you can also pay to test for lots of other parameters as well, and there's lots of licensed laboratories where you can do that. It will also give you information on how to create an inventory of potential contamination activities, implementing your own protection zone. So this is something taken directly from the Municipal Source Protection Program. They generally recommend a 100-meter radius around your water source. And as mentioned, one of the biggest, another big source of contamination for private systems is going to be your septic system. So make sure you visually inspect your septic system and ensure it's pumped out regularly. I recommend about every 5 years. Here's just a few more tips, especially for those on a lake or river intake, ensuring a shoreline buffer to reduce runoff can both protect your source and everyone else sharing that source of water. So to learn more about what you can do to protect your property, please visit the link in the chat. And this concludes our short discussion about the best practices. And we'll turn it over to our guest speaker. Today we have with us Venkat Ramani. Venkat is an environmental professional with over 30 years of diverse experience in water, wastewater, and waste management. As a Senior Operational Instructor with the Walkerton Clean Water Centre since 2008, his key responsibilities include developing curriculum geared to municipal drinking water operators and First Nations, and has delivered more than 20 water-related drinking courses and trained approximately 10,000 staff across the province. Venkat holds a master's degree in environmental engineering from the University of Guelph and is a registered professional engineer in Ontario and a member of the American Waterworks Association, the Ontario Waterworks Association, and the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. Venkat started his career as an environmental engineer in 1988 with the Ministry of the Environment with the Government of India. He has also worked with the town of St. Mary's as the environmental services engineer, and his key role was to ensure that the town's water and wastewater treatment, wastewater collection, and water distribution systems complied with Ontario's Safe Drinking Water Act and applicable regulations under the Act. Venkat's also played a lead role in evaluating alternatives for biosolids management and conducted a pilot scale study with the town receiving the Biosolids Excellence Awards from the Water Environment Association of Ontario for Biosolids Management. During his tenure as a junior engineer with Genevar, for almost 2 years, Venkat was involved in the design of several municipal and non-municipal water systems and municipal class environmental assessment process for several water-related projects. In 2010, Venkat was instrumental in establishing a partnership with BIMO's Tribal Council for the delivery of training to First Nation operators. Venkat also played a key role in establishing a memorandum of understanding with the region of Peel to deliver an on-site water emergency preparedness and response plan procedure course to approximately 175 staff. He's also a member of the Walkerton Clean Water Centre's Training, Advisory, and Research Advisory Committees. So without further ado, I will stop sharing and hand it over to you, Venkat.
Yes. Just give me 1 minute.
Sure.
Okay, so thank you everyone. Thank you the Conservation Authority staff here for having me to come and do the presentation for them. I'm really happy to do this. And can you guys see the presentation, the slide deck, as well as can you hear my voice? Just want to make sure the audio is clear.
Yes, sounds
Okay,
good and
thank you.
looks good.
Thank you. So, I've been asked to talk about the history of source water protection in Ontario. It's a history. So, we all know the fact that Walkerton tragedy happened in 2000. It's a 25th year this year. We just had a, webinar this morning through the center, and we had a lot of people participate in the webinar. We had Justice O'Connor on the panel. He did a great presentation. Explained the process he had to go through with respect to the inquiry, and the recommendations came out of the inquiry. And then we had a doctor from a Grey Bruce Health Unit, and he explained how things turned around and how public health units now they are involved with respect to um, with respect to the oversight of how we do things. Enforcing, especially doing some enforcement in small drinking water systems that fall under 319. So we also had a few other presenters, one from a chief drinking water inspector who was, who just, explaining the complete transition that happened before and post Walkerton, and also another gentleman, Aziz Ahmed. He spoke about standards and all the other stuff that is that legislation that are in place currently now in Ontario. And we also had a couple of other gentlemen. One was actually from a Collingwood utility. He was involved in the actual Walkerton tragedy. He played a very key role in helping the community, and then he was there on the same day when things happened, when the operators called him and they were really panicking and stuff like that. So he was there to help them out to the best he can. And then we had another gentleman from Onwin Windsor Utility, and who was also explaining, what are the things that we do now, post Walkerton. So with that note, again, I'd like to thanks all the participants to be on this one. So let us move on to that history. It's nice to, a lot of people, they don't seem to focus on, they don't know what we have, they don't know what we have done with respect to, or may not know what we have done with respect to source water protection. I always think that prevention is better than cure. If I am able to minimize the contamination coming to the source, which means I'm reducing the hassle, the problems that I may encounter in the plant. It makes an operator's life easier when it comes to managing or treating the water with the minimum contamination getting into the source. So source water protection plays a very crucial role when it comes to delivering a safe drinking water, minimizing the cost of the plant operations, minimizing energy, and making operators' life, much easier, and also, responding to any emergency situations in a timely fashion. So, source water comes from lakes, rivers, underground aquifers, and the primary reason for us to have the source water protection is to prevent contamination the best we can. That's all we can do. We can do the best we can. Certain things are beyond our control, and all we have to do is we how to react, or how to take necessary corrective actions quickly as possible, um, before before something goes wrong. So preventing and responding if something happens as quickly as possible. That is the key behind this source water protection. And overuse can likely lead to shortage of water supply. We have seen many instances in around the world, many countries around the world, they are short of water supply. And I can tell you that there are countries who may be out of water in the next 10 years. So that is a prediction from United Nations. So we have to be very cautiously using the water, and minimize the consumption, and that those are the things we have to keep in mind. Our focus is prevent. So we I'm sure most of you here in the participating in the webinar, they would have come across this signage. It says drinking water protection zone. Basically, it's think like you can't do anything, any stuff or any activity in that zone which can likely impact the source of water. Could be a well, or it could be an intake. So we have to be mindful of that. So then the next question comes. We can clearly see from this picture here, how there is a strong correlation between the well and the surface water. Groundwater moves below the surface. Eventually, they can even move through the watersheds, and then how they interact with each other, and with the different geological material below the ground. You may find a silt, you may find a clay, you may find a gravel. You could have some bedrocks like limestone or granite, depending upon the location where you are. Okay, so I mean, I would say, you're lucky if you find really good water, where especially well water. Otherwise, you may have to deal with if you have a source where there is a lot of contaminants like minerals or other contaminants, then you have to treat them before it goes to the customer. So you can clearly see how the contaminants can likely enter into the source. It could be a runoff from streams. Nowadays, we see more heavy downpour, and when a downpour happens, sometimes the water may not necessarily percolate into the ground. So eventually they run off, and then carry a lot of contaminants with them, including sediments, and then eventually ending up in the surface water bodies like creeks or lakes or streams, and causing contamination. Okay. And also, sometimes you may see certain contaminants naturally occurring, like minerals, for example, iron, manganese, hardness causing compounds like calcium, magnesium, arsenic, etc. They could be naturally occurring. So, I mean, anything naturally occurring, we have to deal with them. And especially when you have something like sulfur, when you have a sulfur, the thing is, we normally, we normally try not to use that sulfur source that has sulfur, because it produces a hydrogen sulfide, which can causes which causes odor, and nobody likes to drink water that has hydrogen sulfide. So landfill sites, another source of contamination. Industrial discharge, like steel plants, power stations like a coal-fired power stations, and pulp and paper mill. They are huge polluters. Mining, for example, mining, they also bring a lot of tailings which may have heavy metals, possibly contaminating the nearby source. Okay, making that water really unfit for drinking, or it can be challenging to treat, down the road. So those are the things. And then now, how why protect source water? So the reason we are trying to protect is sometimes it can be challenging to remove some of the contaminants coming into the plant. So that is why prevention is always better than treating after the fact. Prevention also saves money, and it's much cheaper, um, and to remove than remove contaminants. So obviously, it involves treatment, energy, chemicals. So there's a lot more cost involved, when it comes to treatment. So prevention is always cheaper. And then going to the next one, contamination can ruin a source forever. I can give you a number of examples where water is contaminated with heavy metal, and the water body has those heavy metal, embedded in the sediment, and fishes. Even it got into the fishes. For example, like grassy narrows. Up in near Kenora, there was a pulp and paper industry functioning between 1960 and 1969. They simply ended up dumping, I believe, that 10 tons of mercury in the water in the Wabigoon. And guess what happened? The mercury got into the sediments, and then the fishes consumed those mercury, and then which got converted into what do you call methyl mercury, which is an organic form of mercury, got into the system, bioaccumulated, and then the people who eat fishes. And as you know, that northern Ontario people, one of the main source of livelihood is fishes. They ended up eating those fishes without knowing there is mercury. And then eventually the mercury got into the bloodstream and causing all sorts of issues, etc. Just to give you an example, and that source is still has mercury above the background levels. The fishes have mercury. So the water has mercury. So now can somebody use a source? May likely not. So you need to completely remediate that source, which will be very expensive. So that's why prevention is always very, very important, and not only prevention, it's also awareness, the importance of the source water protection. And other benefits, obviously tourists, they don't like to come to a place where the water is bad. So business is the same thing. How do you expect business to come and do business if there is not enough water, or the water is not up to the standard that can help them to manufacture any product? And so they are all looking for good quality water and fish and wildlife habitat, and all these things will create healthy economies within a community. So they were going to the history, which I already mentioned. The tragedy happened in May 2000 up in Walkerton. It's unfortunate, but we learned some good lessons out of this tragedy. And we all know the fact that a farmer was spreading manure, and eventually this particular strain of E. coli, 0157H7, nobody ever thought that this strain of E. coli would be present in the cattle manure, plus another bacteria called Campylobacter, got into that well number 5, which is not far away from the farm that was spreading manure, contaminating the source, and then causing issues where 7 people died, and then half the town got sick, and then 65 people were hospitalized. So that incident triggered a public inquiry by the province, and Justice O'Connor was appointed to do the inquiry. He did a fantastic job. in conducting the inquiry. Imagine people were really in a different panic mode and everything, and he had to really do a good job to do the inquiry, bringing all the people together, asking questions, and then finally he came up with the two reports. Part one report explained what actually went wrong, and then part two report he highlighted what should be in place so that things don't go wrong in the future. So in other words, he came up with 121 recommendations, in both the reports. And as of now, to my knowledge, all the recommendations have been implemented. And one of the key recommendations that came out of the inquiry was to have a multi-barrier approach to protect Ontario's drinking water. And when you look at the multi-barrier concept, basically it's a source to tap approach. And the first barrier in the multi-barrier approach is source water protection. So what comes first is obviously the source, and that is the first barrier in the multi-barrier approach. And then comes treatment, and then comes distribution, and then comes monitoring, and then how do you manage, if there is a problem. Okay, so that is a multi-barrier approach. There are 5 barriers in the multi-barrier approach. So going to the history again, in 2005, the ministry funded conservation authorities. So they actually started doing some, before the introduction of the Act, the Clean Water Act and regulations pertaining to source water protection. They started doing some, they started funding to the conservation authorities to do some background works, collecting data and doing some technical work surrounding the assessment, technical studies. So that started in 2005, and also funding was given to increase awareness and the knowledge with respect to the proposed legislation for source water protection, so that people knew that something is coming, because back then, pretty much even though the incident happened in Walkerton, all the other places started panicking. Oh, is my water safe or not? So then this legislation kicked in, so, and then before that, in advance of the legislation, because of the awareness, so the public knew that something is going to be in place to protect our source and also in the delivery of safe drinking water. So as part of the awareness, they had the draft, the legislation were posted on the EBR registry, Environmental Bill of Rights registry, for public consultation. So obviously we need to involve the public, anything we do in the province. And so you can see that the conservation authorities we have. There are 36 conservation authorities across Ontario. You can clearly see this. And this was the conservation authorities were established under Conservation Authorities Act that was passed in 1946. And imagine now we are in 2025, almost 70 years of experience they have with respect to watershed management. So they are actually the lead when it comes to managing our vital resources. Okay, so they play a key role. And eventually the Clean Water Act was introduced in October 2006, and to obviously to protect our resources, especially municipal drinking water system resources. We are only the focus is on the municipal drinking water system. Okay, and also undertake some source protection planning studies across Ontario planning process. I'm going to explain what does that planning process mean in the next few minutes. So what is that SPP? Source protection planning process requires existing and planned municipal residential drinking water systems be included. So any municipal residential drinking water system, they have to have this process or go through this process. However, exemptions were given for certain drinking water systems, municipal drinking water systems, um, if they were in the process of upgrading the plant. A good example I can think about was the town of Smith Falls in 2009. They were in the process of upgrading the plant, and so the idea is to build a new intake and a new plant. So they asked for a partial exemption and to be exemption from this whole process, which the ministry allowed. And but again, they had to go through something called council resolution. So they have to go to the council, pass a resolution to get this partial exemption from the source protection planning process. So keep in mind, it has to go through the council process. Council. Municipal council can also require other types of drinking water systems be included in the planning process, source protection planning process. Like for example, that includes cluster of 6 or more private wells or intakes, and and also public or private facilities such as schools, community centers, and trailer parks. Basically, the focus is on designated system, designated. Okay. I believe there are approximately 600 designated facilities under the Safe Drinking Water Act, that was passed in 2002. Okay, so council, they can include in the process if if there is a reason to believe that those systems can likely be a threat to the municipal source. Okay, so they can include. Minister also has the authority to include other types of systems, which means these ones here, in the source protection planning process, falling within any source protection area or any source protection region, which I will explain in the next few more minutes. First Nation Band Council can also require non-municipal drinking water systems serving reserves be included in the source protection planning process. So normally First Nations, because they fall under the federal land, they don't usually get involved in the province, the provincial side of things. However, if you have a First Nation in the middle of in a watershed where you have other municipalities surrounding the First Nation, then at that point of time, the First Nation Band Council may decide, hey, we would like to be part of this source water protection study planning process, and they can. And then I think there is a process that they have to go through to be included in that planning process. And coming to the next slide, the Clean Water Act basically uses watershed boundaries for source protection program. So instead of municipal boundary, they use the watershed boundaries, and which really helps in number of ways, because when you have watershed boundaries, I mean you have a watershed, for example, Thames River, or you have a huge watershed that that supplies water to a number of communities within that region. So it makes sense. So and Clean Water Act also establishes source protection areas and source protection regions, including source protection area means individual watersheds, whereas region includes 2 or more watershed partnered together. It's best to have a region, unless otherwise there is a valid reason to be for an individual watershed. Where the benefit is when 2 more watershed combine together, definitely, they can share resources, they can share knowledge, and because there is a common interest, and they can, if any upstream threats can easily be located and in other communities, so that they can quickly, respond. So there is a benefit, partnering, with the 2 or more watersheds, and in a region. Here is a good example. The This is a Mississippi River Source Protection Region, On the top, this is actually Mississippi Valley Conservation Area. This is Rideau Valley Conservation Area. I mean, the entire watershed drains into the Ottawa River, and you can see the Ottawa River on the top here. Okay, everything drains here. Okay, and then you can see there are it is sometimes some communities may extend beyond the region. So they decided to combine together and then to form a Mississippi Rideau Source Protection Region. And sometimes, here in this specific case, some communities extend beyond the boundaries, and some of them have they go into the on the north. You have the Raisin North Nation, and then the south you have Cataraqui, and then on the west you have Quinte, west. So you have so there is definitely in a situation like this, it's best to coordinate even the regions outside, and then see what best fit, and also to work with a common interest of protecting the source. There are 38 source protection areas, and most mirror conservation authority boundaries when it comes to source protection areas, basically conservation authority boundary. And now, because most of them were grouped together, so we have 19 source protection regions across Ontario that you see here in this slide here. Okay, and we also have a couple in Northern Ontario, few in Northern Ontario. You can see Lakehead, Greater Sudbury, Matagami, you can see, and Mississippi Rideau, Cataraqui, which I just mentioned, which is south of the Mississippi Rideau Conservation Region, and then Raisin Region, South Nation, and then Quinte here. So you can see that some communities may even extend beyond these boundaries here. And look at if you look at the regulations came in, and the act and regulations came in, and 2007 came into effect, and regulations define timelines and also define source protection areas and regions. They also provided rules for source protection committees, and also the terms of reference to do some technical study that I will be explaining in the next few minutes. So timeline. So when you look at the timeline here, the source protection committees were appointed in October 2007. So the legislation was introduced in 2007. Immediately the committees were appointed, and then terms of reference were developed by all these source protection regions, and it went to the ministry for approval. And then once they were approved by the ministry, these regions, they had 1 year to prepare an assessment report, okay, after the approval by the ministry. And then following the report, they developed the source protection plan, and there was a deadline to submit the source protection plan to the ministry. I think the deadline was before. I think some people they were given some extension. So eventually, I think end of December 2012, most of them had their source protection plan completed and submitted, okay, to the ministry. And coming to the next one, we were going to talk about governance. Two governance bodies were created as part of the legislation. One was called Source Protection Committees. There is one Source Protection Committee for every source protection region, which I already explained. There is 19 source protection regions across Ontario. And the Source Protection Committee also is responsible for overseeing development of assessment reports, and also in the development of source protection plan. And also they were responsible for public consultation. This is really, key consultation. So the regulation 288 that was introduced in as 2007 under Clean Water Act stipulates the minimum and the maximum number of members to be included in each source protection the committee. You can see that. the committee, So the question is, how many members I can include. So that was spelled out by the regulation 288. So for example, Quinte Conservation Source Protection Area, they can have a minimum of 6 members and a maximum of 16 members. Lake Erie Source Protection Region, they can have a minimum of 9 members and a maximum of 21 members. Again, so there is a flexibility with respect to how many members you can accommodate. But the key is, when you have these members, they have to represent from different groups, like including municipalities with falling within the watershed, and also industries and small businesses, environmental interest group, the agriculture community, farming community, First Nations, and the general public, citizens who are actively involved in the community. Source Protection Authority, one authority for each source protection area. Sorry, so in each area, and which included the Conservation Authority's board of directors, and they are responsible. The authorities are responsible to form the source protection committee, and also to oversee the source protection program, basically the technical studies, etc., and the development of source protection plan, assessment reports, etc. And then also the budget is very important. How much money is needed to do the technical studies, and how much staffing is needed. All those kind of things were worked out. And also the most important thing is the assessment report and the source protection plan. They have to be developed, within certain time, budget, within the available staff, and then also to ensure that these reports that were developed, they followed the legislative requirements. Terms of reference. So what is the terms of reference mean? 2008 SPRs, all the regions, 19 source protection regions created terms of reference that outlined how an assessment report source protection plan will be produced. So I recall I was involved in this terms of reference preparation. We actually ended up hiring a consultant to do some work for us, because at that time we weren't sure how we are going to go. And so that terms of reference is nothing but a work plan, basically highlighting the drinking water systems to be included in the planning process. For example, I live near London, and then we are part of the Upper Thames River Conservation region, and then we have so many small communities fall within the region, like we have Perth East, Perth West, North Perth, South Perth, and also Stratford, St. Mary's, all these communities, So all these communities have drinking water systems. They have to be included in the part of the process. And then the list of technical studies, the to be included, to be done. Especially the technical studies were focusing on the vulnerabilities. That is the key. What are the threats, and the issues, how to deal with those threats, especially in the vulnerable areas surrounding the wellhead. So if I have a well, what is the threat within the 100 meters radius? The threats, 2 year, within the 2 year time of travel zone, the threat, within the 5 year time of travel zone, like that. So those were the things came out of this study. Vulnerable zones surrounding the wellhead, and also intake protection zone. For example, so let's say this is a Lake Erie. I have the intake here. So basically the intake protection zone, and one intake protection zone 2, and zone 3. That means it tells you if a spill happens, how fast the spill can possibly reach how fast they can reach the intake, and if there is any response time, like that. So that is all. Those things that came out of the vulnerability studies, assessing the risk to the drinking water. And also as part of the other list included developing land use planning policies. So eventually, if there is a threat, then what we need to do, do we need to change the land use zoning bylaws? Should we put some restriction on certain activities? What should we do moving forward with respect to, any development as part of the planning process? I mean, how, what about septic systems? Do we have any septic systems near a well, municipal well, cluster of septic systems? Are they posing a threat? Then, if that is the case, do we need a septic inspection program? Do we need a bylaw? We need a bylaw officer? These are some of the things, that people started thinking, planning everything to reduce the risk, you know, and also monitoring. Do we need monitoring, intensive monitoring, continuous monitoring, so that that way we know there is something coming in the source, so that we can be prepared, and also let the people in the downstream know, hey, there is something here, we have a problem, and then you better be careful or take necessary corrective action. Those kind of things came out of this study, in every source protection region. And also the key is consultation. Every step we moved forward with respect to these technical studies and source water protection efforts. We involved the public because we wanted to be transparent and tell them the benefit of the source water protection legislation, etc., and why we are doing that. And also we looked at list of matters affecting neighboring watersheds. I think I already explained the one good example. Sometimes you may have some communities falling within a region, may have their boundaries outside those region, extending into a different region. So it's always good to collaborate with the other regions and work collaboratively. So coordination is also important, and completing the cost to do the work, and also the schedule to complete all the required tasks are very, very important as part of the which was included as part of the terms of reference. And so, as you know, that I'm not sure if you know this, these the ministry kept because it was something new for the ministry, and there is always, every time they introduce a legislation, you always accept some hiccups along the way, and they have to keep amending. When they keep amending, at the same time, the terms of reference they also need to be amended accordingly, and then they have to be submitted to the province for approval. Again, subject to consultation with the municipalities that are participating within the region as well as the general public. So the assessment report were completed in 2010 and were submitted to the province for approval. I can tell you there's a lot of science behind this report. A lot of work has been involved, great knowledge, great information. I would strongly encourage people who are here watching this webinar, please take a look at the assessment report that came out of the planning process. Wherever you are, go and take a look at the login. You'll be able to find that information on the local conservation authority website. Just Google and you'll be able to look at the document, or talk to the local town or city, and they'll be able to help you out to find this document. So this studies, the assessment report included physical characteristics, the chemistry of the water, and the quantity is also really important. Is my water declining? Is my water table declining? And or the lake water levels in the lake has gone down, or is it gone up? What is the impact due to the climate change? We are seeing a lot of changes happening now, especially with respect to climate and the land use. So what is the land use we have, and currently, and how it's impacting the source water within a given source protection region. All those things came out of this study. How water is distributed through the watershed. Basically, it talks about the budget, water budget, what is coming in, what is going out. That water budget study. It's a very complicated study, in my opinion. Normally, they engage a hydrogeologist to do such a study. They have pretty good models to run their study and to do the water budget. Okay. And also, if there is any risk of overuse or contamination, I have my experience. I came across a situation. I used to live in a small town in back home. We had we were very close to the sea, Bay of Bengal, and we had a great water, no issues. But all of a sudden, because of the industrialization, suddenly so many industries came to the town, and they were sucking water so much that we were able to see seawater intrusion, seawater getting into those wells, and then spiking the TDS level really, really above the WHO standards. And now people are using reverse osmosis in every home to remove those dissolved solids. So which really changed the landscape of the water. What was before and now. Because of the over extraction of the water, which can impact the water as well quality. And the assessment report eventually ended up mapping vulnerable areas surrounding the wellhead. I already explained wellhead protection areas and intake protection zones surrounding the intake protection zone 1, 2, and 3. And if you have a municipal well, it's a wellhead protection area zone 1, zone no, sorry, wellhead protection area A, B, C, D, like that. Basically tells you the time of travel, okay, within those vulnerable zones. And also, the assessment report ended up, identifying highly vulnerable aquifers and also groundwater recharge areas. So the recharge is important. The recharge happens in specific locations. After the rain gets back into the ground. Obviously you see that water cycle completing. Okay, so water evaporation happens, it goes into the atmosphere, condensation happens, and then eventually rainfall happens, and then getting into the ground and then recharging and the wells, in particular areas. And also the mandatory policies. So source protection plans included policies to protect local drinking water sources, and these policies may differ region to region across the province. I mean, there was an interesting question asked by a participant this morning, how these policies are monitored. Yeah, it's a good, pretty much every community has to take this initiative, having some kind of a policy in place. And again, as I give a good example, how are we managing the salt application, and which is another threat to our source water. Septic's another threat, a possible threat. And then industries surrounding the wellhead intake, the vessels moving around the intake, boats and stuff. There is a possibility of fuel spill, surrounding the intake. So what do we do so that these boats or anything, they don't move close to our intake? So having something in place like buoy or something, surrounding the intake at certain radius. So those are the things, that people have to have a land use policy. And then every time I know there is a region, they have a policy, they have something in place that any development happens, it goes to the building department before they issue a permit, and then they carefully look at the application and see, is this going to be a threat? Where is this location? Is it falling within the vulnerable zones, or surrounding the wellhead? How far they are from the municipal well, and are they going to be a threat based on the type of activity that is going to happen? And they can possibly even reject the application, or they can even say, hey, you need to have a risk management plan. etc. So they can put all those conditions in place to ensure that that the business activity falling within the zones or within the vulnerable zones or vulnerable areas, they don't impact the water quality. Okay, so those are the things they differ from region to region. And again, created by Source Protection Committee with input from stakeholders. And so municipal role, when it comes to the municipalities, they play a key role in the source protection plan and development of source protection plan, and also because they own and operate the drinking water system, and they can choose to be part of the technical studies. For example, City of Ottawa, I know that they take water from Ottawa River. There are two plants. One is Britannia plant. The other one is Lemieux. The staff decided to be part of the technical studies, and also they were partly involved in the development of policies. Okay. And the council, of course, anything happens in a municipal world, the council needs to be kept in loop. And again, council, they have an authority to include other drinking water systems if they think there is a possible threat due to could be a private well. They might think, that this private well may be a threat to the drinking water source. They can also possibly include them as well, or a public well, or etc. Again, municipal role also includes implementation when it comes to source protection plan. Once they are approved, the implementation, that is a real challenge. That takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. Obviously involves a lot of money, funding. You don't expect funding, but resources involved. As I said, a good example I can think about is, having a septic inspection program in place, awareness, general awareness, having a fact sheet for the general public with respect to maintaining a septic system, and also and have an enforcement, like a bylaw officer to inspect the septic system so often, and hiring a municipal risk management official. Those officials, they go out to high risk industry that may be existing already in the source protection region, just to have a walkthrough to see what do they do, and how it may likely impact the source water. And then if necessary, they may even ask for a risk management plan to be submitted. Basically, the risk management plan is to manage risks associated with the activity within the vulnerable areas or vulnerable zones surrounding the intake as well as surrounding the wellhead. So those are the things that could trigger changes to municipal official plans or zoning bylaws. Public role, they also play a very, very important role throughout the source protection planning process. Every time we do something, it's always it's very important to involve public through different public engagement strategies. It can be in any form. It can be having a public open house, or and then explain to the general public, or through telephone, through feedback forms. Different ways we can involve public. But the key is being transparent and open in what we are doing and why we are doing, and a possible impact in the community, etc. And the benefit of doing this. Between 2005 and 7, CA Conservation Authority staff undertook an aggressive public awareness campaign to educate people before the legislation kicked in with respect to the source protection planning process. So, which was a good thing. I strongly feel that we did a good job, as a province, when it comes to protecting our source and educating public. SPCs CA staff, they also are responsible for sharing the information with the public and other interested individuals in the community, like farmer, the businesses, First Nations, all those people to be, they keep them in loop and make sure all the draft technical studies and the source protection plans went through public consultation process. Before you finalize all these technical documents, studies, and the source protection plan, it's very important to send a draft first and then receive public feedbacks. And then some people may object, some people may ask questions. It's always good to get their input, which may be valuable, and address those questions if there is any during this whole process. Here is one good example of public consultation. This is actually taken from here. It says very clearly it's from a Gray Sabal Sagin Conservation Notice of Public Consultation. Here it says proposed Section 36 updates to the local protection plan, assessment report, and explanatory document. Asking public to provide some input. And the consultation period was between October 13th and November 19th, 2021. And they had hosted a webinar, information webinar with question and answers on November 10th. So many ways of doing the public consultation. As long as the key is, to involve public. Here is another one. Okay, so anytime an amendment happens to the existing legislation, and you have to obviously go back to the public and send out a notice to the public and say there is an amendment or some changes have happened in the legislation. These are the changes, and now we are going to be including all of these stuff now, and I want your feedback, and this is the last date for you to submit any comments in writing, and like that, So you can, here is a good, another good example here. So funding. Now the key question comes, funding. Whether the entire study that happened in all these 19 source protection regions were funded. Yes, the province paid, I think they committed to pay, and then I think they paid 100% of the cost to develop the assessment reports as well as source protection plans, which really helped all these communities, because I know some communities were really struggling for financially, because they didn't have enough tax base. So it was a good thing from the province to fund these costs, or at least partially, if not fully. And municipalities also contributed substantial time in support of source protection planning work. And I think the province had also developed guidelines with respect to the planning process, and also a guidance document on what systems can be included in the planning process and the cost implications. For example, let's say the council is, council wants to include a certain drinking water systems, or private wells as part of the planning process, then whether that can be included, what is the criteria, or and the cost implications, etc. And the last thing is, what about people, private property owners who are impacted by this legislation? Unfortunately, the Clean Water Act did not allow for any compensation to be paid to affected property owners. However, they had a program called a Drinking Water Stewardship Program in Ontario, which provided some financial assistance until 2011, and providing grants to take early actions in advance of approved source protection plans. So that was done, early stages itself. Like, for example, somebody may have an abandoned well, so may have a well sitting in the backyard. That property might be within the vulnerable zone, close to a municipal well. So there is definitely a potential for contamination to enter through that well, and which is sitting there doing nothing. It needs to be abandoned. So eventually, that they would have received some funding to abandon the well properly, as per the regulation 903. Okay, so all those things happened. I remember Peel region staff, they were saying that they were actually looking at some of those wells within the source protection region, and then abandoning those wells which were not in use, so that there is no cross contamination happening from those wells that are not used. So those things really happened, and so at the end of the day, it's all to protect our valuable resources. So I think that comes to the end of my presentation, and I really thank you folks for participants who registered to be on the webinar, and also the Conservation Authority staff for giving me an opportunity to present this. And I hope you folks are taking some valuable and a key message, and start thinking differently, and if possible, even go back and revisit your source protection plan, and also look at those threats, not only existing threats. Maybe you have to keep an eye on what may likely come in the future. You never know. Things are changing, and you may have there are so many emerging contaminants that are ending up now. We are seeing so many things occurring in different parts of the world. One of them is PFAS, which is gaining more traction, and microplastics, another one, pharmaceuticals, endocrine disrupting products. All these things are that people have been investigating in different watersheds, across Ontario. So we have to stay vigilant and continue to do a good job. Okay, so with that note, thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have.
Thank you, Venkat, for that very educational presentation. I know that this was a slight departure from our usual sort of topics in this webinar, more focused on the private system side of things, but we're happy to have you on here to sort of acknowledge and commemorate the 25th anniversary of the Walkerton tragedy there. So thanks again for that great presentation. I know we have a lot of municipal staff in attendance here as well, who I think should take a lot from that, as they are an important part of that process. So I will share my screen again if you can stop sharing,
Yeah,
Venkat.
sure.
Thank you. Mm. All right, so now we'll move into some of our pre-submitted questions for our guest expert. So thank you everyone who submitted these. So first off, without human influence, does water quality remain constant? How often does nature change water quality? So I think how often is the water quality changing through natural processes, etc.
Yeah, very good question. That is exactly, I just spoke a couple of minutes ago, or that the climate change, how climate change can impact the water quality, and the other example I was talking about, the weather pattern that we see lately. We experience now, heavy downpour, and the water not percolating eventually into the ground, running off, carrying all the sediments and everything stuff along the way, leading to water body, and finally all these water bodies end up draining in the Great Lakes, and then bringing all these contaminants that we have never seen before to the level, so increasing the turbidity, increasing the organics, increasing the color, and etc. I can give another good example was many years ago. I don't know if you recall that we had an acid rain. We had an acid rain in Mumbai, many years ago when I remember when I was young, and basically a lot of emissions came from power plants, etc. Sulfur dioxide emissions and NOx emissions, and then going to the atmosphere, condensation happening, and then eventually rainfall happening, bringing all these pollutants back into the water, and then making the water bodies acidic, which completely changed the pH of the water, and then causing problems. And I think California experienced a similar situation, acid rain, many years ago, if I recall, but I exactly don't know the year. But I remember recall seeing a news, many years ago. And the other good example I can think about is the what is that? The bushfire, forest fire that is currently happening in a few places in Manitoba, in BC, in California. The trigger for any bushfire is could be one of the triggers could be drought, which is again the climate change impact, drought and lightning, and will trigger a wildfire, and then making the trees will end up burning, and then leaving nothing but ashes, and the ashes are nothing but carbon, which is nothing but organic matter. Eventually, this organic matter will find its way into the water body, increasing the color, increasing the organic matter. That will drive up our chemical dosages, as well as increasing the chemical cost, and also our that will drive up our use of chlorine in the plant, and then eventually producing more disinfection byproducts that we may have to deal with. So all these are nothing but repercussions due to nature, and eventually affecting our water quality.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
So how has Ontario progressed over the past 25 years regarding the gaps in source water protection, especially regarding rural drinking water? I think you touched on this a little bit, but if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I think I've touched on rural. I mean, pretty much. This is, as you saw that there are 19 source protection regions, pretty much covering all, like most parts of Ontario here. And the only thing that is not included in the source water protection is First Nations in northern communities, northern Ontario, because they are on federal land. We can't force them to be part of this source water protection. However, even though I say that, many First Nation communities are doing their due diligence, and they actually end up developing their own source protection plans, in their reserve, for the reserve, because they want to make sure that the water is well protected, because they have so many other challenges, retaining operators, finding people, running plant, finding resources to, so they also have developed such plans. But however, more work needs to be done with respect to source water protection in those First Nations, which I believe that may happen in the near future. But as far as other municipal systems, whether it's a urban or rural community, I think we have done a pretty good job in addressing all those gaps, which I just explained. My presentation, would have given you all the information. I think, we are in a good place now where we are, after spending so much money in doing all these studies and looking at all those threats, and then, and having emergency response procedure if needed to be.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm.
That's great insight, especially regarding the First Nations communities. So where do the drinking water parameters come from, and what is considered healthy or unhealthy water? So I think that's kind of looking at where the sort of baselines for these, what we consider healthy water, how is that sort of established?
Yeah, it's a basically everything comes from Health Canada. Health Canada, they look at contaminants and to see, what happens if somebody gets exposed to these contaminants, when they ingest water, and then given when it gets into our body, is it going to impact people's health, lives? And we know on an average we drink in Ontario roughly anywhere from 1 liter to 1.5 liters per day. And then again, different people, drink different amount of water every day. So all those factors will have to take, so they do Health Canada, they do all these studies, exposing animals to see the impact first. And then at that point, at some point, they will make a determination. Yes, definitely there is a risk. And we see this contaminant pretty much more prevalent, across the country, and then eventually having other technical experts from the field, and they also look at what is happening around globally, other countries, what they do with respect to specific contaminant. Do they have standards for those contaminants? And then based on all these different information they put together, they will decide to have a standard for that, health-based standard for a particular contaminant. Just one good example I can think about. We all know about iron and manganese. Iron and manganese, it's naturally occurring in groundwater. Typically, they occur in groundwater. So iron is all important for our health, for our metabolism, and we get iron from meat and nuts, or fruits, veggies, etc. Same thing, manganese is also important for our health. But what happened lately, few years ago, I mean, initially we thought iron and manganese was just an aesthetic issue, color issue, because iron, if you have iron in the water, they produce a rusty brown color or red color, which is just an aesthetic. And if you have manganese in the water, it produces a black color or dark gray. So until few years ago, we were under the impression that manganese was just only an aesthetic objective. Then Health Canada, after some studies, they eventually found out that manganese at certain concentration, they can impact children's ability to learn, basically impacting children's IQ, which is nothing but intelligent quotient. So now they ended up bringing health-based standards for manganese, and they also have an aesthetic objective for manganese. So just to give you an idea how things can possibly change, what we thought was not was fine, was just an aesthetic, now became an health issue, in the future.
It's a really interesting example. Thank you. Um, so question about microplastics in water. I think
Mhm.
it's generally becoming increasingly well known how common they are in our oceans now, especially. But like just from a more drinking water source issue, is this something we should be concerned about?
Yeah, so we have seen some studies have been done in Lake Ontario, with respect to how much microplastics we have. They found around 20%, if I recall the number correctly, based on my memory, 20% in storm water overflow getting into Lake Ontario, almost the same percentage, even probably a higher percentage in wastewater. But the good news is our drinking water plants are designed in a way that they can even remove some of these microplastics, um, and also even wastewater. I think they are able to remove some of these microplastics to some extent, but not to a full extent. So as of now, we don't know the implications of microplastics on the human health, and still we are in the in the in the early stages, and the toxicity associated with ingesting microplastics. But but definitely, there is a lot of attention around the globe with respect to microplastics, and once I think the key is testing for microplastics, finding a reliable method to test for microplastics, and then understanding the toxicity of microplastics on the human health. We know the impact on the fish population, and but on the human health, we are still in the early stage. But even though there are some reports saying that they can impact big time the human health, like big time means it impacts human health, but we are still in the early stage. We don't know yet. But as far as I know, I was to, some studies indicate that there are more microplastics in the bottled water as compared to tap water. So
Mhm.
I would say tap water is much more safe as definitely it's safer as compared to bottled water, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Um, just a general well question. So how long does a well last? I know that there's
Yeah. So the wells last, keep in mind the wells, they last, we can't say how long they last, but they usually last for a long time. Again, as long as they're well maintained, well constructed, and tested, and those are the key things. It's not just drilling a well. There are so many things that we have to take care of. And again, we also have to understand the characteristics of the water in that well. If it's acidic, or then you may not, or if you have sulfur in the water, you may simply abandon the well. Or if you have hydrogen sulfide, or something that may be objectionable by general public, it you may end up abandoning the well. So testing is important, maintaining them usually, and then also inspecting the well is important. Inspecting means hiring a licensed well technician, and then do a actual good inspection, sending a camera down to see the condition of the casing, to determine if there is any cracks or holes in the well casing, which may end up allowing water seepage, causing contamination. So these are the things that people, communities have to do, or even individual private owners, well owners, they may have to do it on a periodical basis, or maybe every 10 years or 15 years, a good practice. So yeah, I think if you continue to do that, I think the well, usually they last longer, and the water quality, I mean, that way you can also understand if there is a constant change in the water quality, or it still remains, steady.
yeah, that's a good answer.
It's like, sorry, it's like asking, how long my car lasts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's the same thing, there is no definite answer.
And I think if anyone wants to learn more about that, our previous webinar we did was all about well maintenance and drinking water testing. So highly recommend checking that out if you'd like to learn more and uh, weren't able to make that webinar. So does low water pressure in well water lead to boil water advisories? Bit of a specific question here, but
I mean, low water pressure in a well water. So are they referring to low water pressure in the pipe, in the distribution, in the supply?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so assuming the question is pertaining to low water pressure in a distribution system, if I have a municipal well, there's a low water pressure, the pressure drops below 20 psi. I mean, it'll definitely tempt the local health unit to issue a boil water advisory as a precautionary measure. However, the ministry says, you don't have to issue a boil water advisory. However, even having said that, it's very important to understand if the water going out to the customer is, if the water going out is improperly disinfected. I think that is what really, um, you know, um, makes the health unit to issue a boil water advisory just as a precautionary measure. I mean, to be honest, the chances of somebody getting sick in a low pressure, water pressure situation is very slim, could be very slim, or say, seldom happens. But as a precautionary measure, they would do that. And because there may be chances of, cross contamination that may likely happen in a low pressure event.
All right. Okay, I think that is all of our pre-submitted questions. So thank you for going over those. I'm not sure if we have any
I see a question here.
questions. Yeah.
I see a question from somebody by name. Yeah, here it says there is a question. It talks about will the provincial government continue to provide financial support for source protection plan studies such as macro invertebrate or brook trout population surveys. Um, I don't know because I don't work for the ministry. I don't know. They will continue to do that. I wasn't sure they were if they were actually providing financial support in the past, and how long they supported. I don't know, and I'm not sure whether they will continue to support. Um, um, if it's ongoing, I don't know. I can't. Sorry, I can't. I won't be able to answer that question specifically. I think that question should go to the ministry.
Yeah, I agree. Natasha, was there anything else?
No, it looks like everyone's just saying thank you to Venkat for the amazing presentation and sharing your knowledge with us. Um, so if there's no other questions from the chat, I think we can ask the chat some questions. We want to hear from you guys. And we just want to ask, I think it's 6 questions. They're poll questions. They just popped up on your screen. And they just kind of help us give an idea of how to improve these webinars and what we can do to make them better in the future. So we'll give you a couple minutes just to do that there. And Thomas has just put some links in the chat in case you wanted some more resources. Yeah, so we'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and I'll leave it off to Trent after.
Thank you, Natasha.
And thank you.
So thanks again for everyone for attending and helping answer our polls there. We don't have our next webinar date quite determined. I believe the topic may be on cisterns, but that may still to be decided. But we'll look to have a couple more this year as well. And just as a reminder to everyone that if you missed one of our previous webinars, you can view recordings of all of them on YouTube, covering topics such as well maintenance, drinking water safety, climate change, and boil water advisory. So I know Venkat discussed that a little bit. Just want some more insight into how boil water advisories might occur. As well as like we have 2 presentations on harmful algal blooms from sort of different perspectives, groundwater 101, drinking water testing and treatment, septic systems, and a bit of a niche one on realty and rural drinking water. So that's targeted more at realtors specifically. So if you can find any of those by searching Drinking Water Wise webinars or going to the Quinte Conservation YouTube channel, they're all accessible there. And once again, if you'd like to get in touch with any of our hosts, here's where you can find all of their email addresses. We'll be happy to help out any way we can. If you have any questions about this webinar specifically, we'll be able to have any questions for our guest from this webinar. We'll be able to reach out to him for those, or if you just about the webinar process or best practices. If you have any suggestions for future webinar topics as well, we're always happy to hear. So thanks again, Venkat, and thank you again, everyone, for attending. That concludes today's Drinking Water Wise webinar.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. Thanks, everyone.